Great. So Ruckus Media here with someone I haven't spoken to in a very long time. I mean, last time I spoke to him was on radio. He was a lot younger than he is today. I was a lot younger than I am today. Man on the other side there, Charles Saunders. Charles, thanks so much for your time. It has been a while since I mean, radio, long time ago.
It has been, and it's been absolutely wonderful. It feels like yesterday that I spoke to you. So yeah,
amazing.
From where we
amazing, just catching up. It was like, hey, we must have only caught up 2 weeks ago, but no, it's actually been a number of years. So, Charles, just by way of introduction, lots has changed in your life since that radio interview. And just looking at that CV, I'll probably have to start now, finish next week, Tuesday, and then we will probably only be able to get chatting. But to summarize that CV, you're the current wheelchair basketball South Africa CEO, recently elected as the IWBF Africa president, and you sit on the IWBF World Competitions Commission.
Correct.
You are a representative for Africa for the FIBA Development Commission. You're certified FIBA and IWBF Game Commissioner, FIBA Technical Delegate for Competitions, a retired wheelchair and able-bodied international referee. That's the first page. Let me get to the second page.
That's enough. That's enough.
That's enough. I mean, if I look at your CV, that's almost 40 years you've given to the game of basketball.
Yes, I was very, very, very privileged. As a young kid, my father took me to a movie called One on One, and it was a basketball movie about a youngster who unfortunately was the old water carrier, as they're known as.
Yeah.
And he became the shortest man in the history of able-bodied basketball to win the dunking competition, and so be it. So that was where my interest was veined from. My dad was a professional soccer player. He played for Durban City and Durban United for many years. He wanted us to play soccer, and my brother went into rugby and I went into basketball, and that was it. So from 11 years of age, I've been playing basketball and been involved in basketball. And the opportunity came when I was headhunted a couple of years ago by Leon Fleischer, who sits on SASCOC at this time period, also with disability sport. And he asked me to take over wheelchair basketball. My administrative career has been in basketball all the years, although I'm qualified in different fields. And when the opportunity came about, I thought, well, why not? It's something that I love. And if I can do it at the same time, earn a living and put back to the sport, why not? It's a way forward.
So like I mentioned, almost 40 years, more than 40 years in the sport. You've obviously seen quite a number of things change in the sport. Obviously, we must make a distinction between able-bodied basketball and obviously wheelchair basketball, but a lot of changes across both of the sports you've seen through your lifetime. But I don't think anything up until the beginning of 2020 would have prepared you for what a global pandemic did to the sport last year. So very briefly, the state of basketball, let's call it up until February of 2020, and then your thoughts on how the sport was impacted by COVID during the most part of 2020.
Absolutely. Well, I must say that since FIBA has gone what they call FIBA 1, in other words, FIBA World is now the structure that runs all basketball. And of course, you've got the zones, the Americas, Africa, Australasia, and so forth. And they run their basketball within their community, but everything is FIBA 1. So the situation is you go into a venue in Africa and you walk into a venue in Europe, it looks exactly the same. Everything is uniformed, everything is structured. And that's been the biggest change over the last, I'd say, 4 years of basketball. It's become very professional. It is, as you're fully aware, the number one sport for women in the world. It's the number one sport in Africa for women as well. It is the number 2 sport to football in the world. And it's one of the highest paid sports in the world. So where we stand today, basketball has changed its total profile and has become very, very effective. The likes of going into China in 2019 and having a look at that, China put on 8 cities, and in the 8 cities, they ran 32 countries of basketball in a 4-week program to qualify for the World Championships, was absolutely extraordinary. And this is the way that FIBA is going now. So no longer are we having these qualifications every 2 years now. So it's a qualification period for 3 years, and it goes back into a World Championship in the 4th year. Similar to what we see with your Olympics and your big World Cup soccers and rugby and so on and so on. So that is where they've got onto the stage at the moment, and it has really changed the face of the game. Wheelchair basketball, of course, is now moved into the home of basketball, which is in Geneva, Switzerland. And what has come about there is that they too, their profile has changed completely as well. They become one organization, although they've got the zones that work within the different regions. The realities that happen is that they've become extremely more professional and tagged onto able-bodied basketball, which again means all sponsorships and everybody is all working from the same page, and it's changed the face of the game as well. 2020.
Sorry, I just want to jump in there. So does that mean then that the sponsorships that come on board for able-bodied basketball automatically, flow down to wheelchair basketball, or is there still within business, within the sponsorship domain, this differentiation between the two as fundamentally different sports?
Okay, so your major sponsors, like your ball sponsor for running basketball is Molten, for 3-on-3 is Wilson. So those properties, those intellectual properties move down with the sports itself, okay? When we're dealing with the Olympics and the Paralympics, if Coca-Cola is one of the main sponsors, then so they'll be involved in both entities. So yes and no, although each is entitled to go out and get their own sponsorship for their own competitions, the reality is at the end of the day is that your major sponsors, your naming sponsors are all the same. So it really does help, because the type of ball that we use is a very professional ball created by Molten. It's designed for wheelchair basketball players. It's designed for able-bodied players. So at the same time as it's one sponsor, we have 2 different balls for 2 different groups of players. Okay. But we must also understand that FIBA also takes care of blind basketball as well. Sorry, my apologies, deaf basketball. Blind basketball, a bit of a problem.
I was just going to ask, how does that play? How's that play?
Yeah, so they got the deaf basketball under the input as well. They have different various forms of the game. The 3-on-3 is the action cricket, if I can call it that way, of basketball. Yep. That is very big. That's a small entity on its own, and is growing larger and larger and larger every single year. I look at it. In Africa, it's taken off. And of course, as a result of that, I was involved in the IWBF structure in getting 3-on-3 wheelchair basketball off the ground. And we will be hosting for the first time ever the Commonwealth 3-on-3 games with wheelchair basketball, which is a milestone for us in the long run.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how's it hit us since 2020? There's been negatives and there's positives. Of course, everybody, and I can't and take the opportunity and very heartfelt sorrow to all those that have lost family members and siblings and so on in this terrible pandemic that's taken place. It has affected sport, not only basketball, but every other sport in the world. It's a reality that we're facing. It's a disease that cannot be controlled at the moment. Hopefully, the vaccines that come through will be able to allow us to go back to a normal side of life. But under the new normal, what has it done for us? Well, at the same time as saying that it stopped the flow of the game, what it has done from an administrative point is that it's created easy administrative structures. We've been able to communicate more through IT, through social media. We've been able to keep in contact with everybody within the actual structure of the game. And myself within Africa has been wonderful that the social media platform was never explored before in this particular avenue, sadly. And it just shows that something like this had to take place for us to be able to sit, as we're sitting right now, talking face to face over over a screen and at the same time be able to get more done than what we've ever been able to do in the history of wheelchair basketball, as well as able-bodied basketball. So the pros are definitely more communication, and the fact that we've been able to go on e-learning programs and online skill trainings, that is something that we didn't really utilize to its full extent, if I can put it in simple terminology. What we've learned from this is that, you know what, it's a click away and we're talking to somebody. Whether he's on the other side of the world or not, whether he's at 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock in the morning, we're still getting meetings done, and we're holding more meetings. We're getting more administrative structures put into place than what we've ever done before. So the negativity, yes, the sport has come to a stop. And if you are playing the sport, there are huge restrictions that are around it.
Yeah.
It does challenge financially. It does challenge from mental capacity as well, because it's a different way of doing things. And when they came up and they termed this new terminology, the new normal, it really is a new normal. It's just as a prime example, FIBA competition at this time period, prior to getting to the competition, is 2 COVID tests before you even land, before you even get on the airplane, I should say. On landing, there's a further COVID test, 48-hour isolation period. You then go into competition. There's further testing during the competition. Before you leave the competition, a further test. And when you arrive back home, another test. So that changes. This is protocol.
So this was the protocol that was employed, what was it, in December at the Uganda qualifiers? And
this was in Rwanda, correct.
Sorry, Rwanda. Okay, in December. And these were the number of tests that literally, I mean, so what you're saying is you had to book your ticket on the airplane, then you had to take your 2 COVID tests within the 48 hours prior to getting on that plane. If anything was positive, money gone, plane flight gone, sorry, go back home, sit still. If that was negative, you jumped on the plane, you arrived that side, and then it was literally test every 48 hours.
Yeah, so the test that did take place was 48 hours after arriving.
Okay.
And then basically 5 days into the competition. So if for example, we had players that arrived from the States and from outside Africa who were all tested, unfortunately, positive. Now, when they left, there was negative tests. When they arrived, it was positive tests. So it shows as well that this virus does sit inside the human body for a while before it manifests itself. And the protocols that FIBA put into place, I must say, were extraordinary from a technical delegate side, running the operations of the competition. Very, very clear guidelines on what needs to take place before you can actually play within the bubble. Not only that, but very safe guidelines, and something that I would be able to recommend any other sport that's out there that's struggling to get going to implement this, because if they do implement this, they will have a COVID-free structure within their sporting bodies. From wheelchair basketball side, in South Africa, we did a little bit differently. We also, prior to competition starting, 10 days to prior, we took temperature variances of players on a daily basis. This was the first indication that we could pick up whether the person is infected or not. There's questionnaires, health forms that need to be filled out. We needed to establish whether people had been at funerals or churchgoers, et cetera, where there's large mass gatherings that take place. Those people were identified immediately as possible COVID candidates. We then did blood pressure tests on them. We then monitored them very, very carefully within a period of 48 hours on arrival. There had to be isolation rooms set up. There had to be doctors on standby, and so on. But the reality is, at the end of it, was we were able to hold 2 successful competitions in South Africa without one COVID case. So the protocols do work. And if people implement them, they will have successful tournaments without consequences at the end of the day.
Charles, I want to ask, a lot was made, and here I'm looking at the global scene, a lot was made about the NBA coming back and the bubble that was being created for the NBA when they came back sort of late last year. Similar bubbles have now been employed across all other sporting codes within which players need to strictly operate, with
Yes.
obviously kind of heavy penalties and things like that for the players and the clubs and etc. and the franchises. We saw a lot of the comments from those top pro ballers about the impact of the bubble, first of all, on them personally, professionally, mentally, physically, family life, etc. Your insight into the impact of the bubble on the youngsters that were at these Africa qualifications in Rwanda and Egypt. I mean, was there some major issues, you know, with players struggling to deal with this bubble scenario?
Yes and no. Again, what Rwanda did, and maybe it's not what all countries are doing at the moment, but each team was put into a separate hotel. So the if I can say, the Ubuntu of the teams within their own structures was very, very good. It was those that were isolated that had to be taken to a different isolation center altogether, where they really and truly struggled. It's very different because one hasn't experienced this before. So from a mental perspective, from a psychological point, one struggled with it. You had to stay within your room for 48 hours. Your food was brought to your door. There was no contact with anybody unless you picked up a telephone and spoke to somebody, or got onto a web call or something to that effect. The difference of freedom restriction is something that you have to accept. I mean, it's like you and I right now being based at home all the time because we can't go out and have meetings with people for the fear that this pandemic is going to affect you and your family. And the realities that we faced was that those that were isolated for a period of 10 days through the competition, and mentally it affected them. The one thing that needs to be put into place is that those that are isolated need to be entertained in some given way, whether it is watching specific television or movies, or being able to physically watch the game and interact with their players through webcam or something to this effect. That needs to be done. Those that were locked away for a period of time, they really did lose it, and they reacted in accordance to it, where they just wanted the hell out of the room that they were in. Difficulty from a psychological point, because then you've got to talk that individual down and to say to him, look, the consequences are that your whole team gets suspended, your whole team gets put away because of the selfishness of yourself just wanting to be with your team at this given time period. And I think if there's any message to any sportsman out there, it's this message, and to families and to everybody who are kind of saying, well, the hell with this COVID story, we're doing what we want to do. The realities is that one person gets infected and everybody within that structure is shut down. We see it with the Sharks. We've just seen it with the Lions and the Bulls, with our rugby. The fact is that games had to be cancelled and postponed and so on and so on. The financial implication is huge, let alone how many people get infected very quickly. And the biggest concern about this virus right now is the asymptomatic people, is that they are carriers. You don't pick it up. They go through life and everything is cool, and yet the people around them are dying because they passed on without realizing it. And this is something that we've got to be really, really careful about. And within a sport environment, to shut down a sport is get one or two COVID infected members to come into that sporting environment, and then you've got 60 to 80 people that have a possibility of all being hospitalized. That's the reality behind it.
Charles, you spoke about a lot of good things coming out of COVID, the pandemic period, things like communication, etc. But the mental health component, I mean, the experiences that you guys had in Rwanda, and the experiences many other sportsmen and women are having around the world, is that now forcing sports like yourself, is it forcing FIBA to start looking at the mental preparation that many of these teams and many of these players have to undergo, and probably will have to undergo in the foreseeable future? I mean, I'm looking at your draft calendar for this year. surely there's going to be a lot of mental preparation, to take into account, just in case you end up having 20, 30 players having to be isolated and go through exactly the same experiences that you've experienced in Rwanda.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that FIBA definitely has their house in order. The manuals and the direction that they have provided with the teaching elements that come through with it is actually very, very good. There's mental preparation that's inside there. There's complete documentation on what to do, how to do it. The online courses with the psychologists and so forth is taking place all the time with team managers, coaches. It has created a different way of coaching. Likewise with the refereeing, and I'm very involved with the refereeing in Africa, with the technical commission. It's a very different philosophy now, because it's not a factor that you're just rocking up on an aeroplane in a suit with your referee's clothing and you're going to now referee a tournament for 10 days. Yeah. The mental aspect behind that is that official it's constantly in the back of the mind that I'm touching the ball that these players are playing with. I am involved in situations where if contact and a fight takes place, I'm in between them, separating them. There's sweat, there's saliva, there's all the other aspect that one needs to take into consideration. And one doesn't think about it until after the game or after we come into a seminar and we're talking about this, and suddenly you see the realities hit everybody out there saying, you know what, we've got to sanitize each time we touch that ball. And every time there's a timeout or there's a halftime break or something to this effect, that there's a full sanitization that's taking place. The ball is sanitized and constantly sanitized during the course of the game, because it's one of the elements that transmit the disease very quickly. Yeah. The difficult aspect behind it was putting in all the PPP requirements, because one forgets, one gets involved in the game, and the hell with putting your mask on, the hell with sanitizing your hand when you come off and sit on the bench and whatever the case may be. Everything is about the game and the energy behind that game, and the synergy that exists. The last thing on your mind at that time is the COVID. So the mental preparation now is dealing with them in technical meetings and dealing with them on a daily basis with a constant awareness all the time. Online e-learning courses, seminars, webinars, and all of this is done prior to a competition. So there's a full build-up 6-7 weeks before you even get into that competition on awareness campaign. And then there's pamphlets and all the other things that go through with it.
So let's get controversial now. You've got all of these sports, football, basketball, none are excluded. You're in a situation where you've got all these tests being done. People are passing left, right, and center. Some are failing, etc. But they're being tested regularly. You're in a situation where people are being kept away. Social distancing is being mandated and monitored and being made almost law, let's call it that. Yes. But then you get onto the court, you get onto the field. There's the tackle situation where I'm after the ball. I now need to get the ball.
Sorry, just let me get my pup off here quickly. Hold on, apologies.
Obviously, someone else wants to get
involved as well.
So you get into a situation where now people are in the tackle, they're in the challenge, they're fighting for the ball. There's close interaction. You obviously can't play with a mask. Now a player comes off the court, is breathing heavily, etc. They stipulate that I must now put my mask straight on. I mean, that player's struggling to breathe, to try and get their breath back, and now they're being forced to limit that. So surely there's a lot of controversy. Surely there's a lot of aspects around some of these regulations. And yes, we admit that the regulations are needed and that they are doing the right thing and they are helping and the cause. But some of them seem to be a little bit irrational.
In my opinion only, because I have to be very careful on what I say here, being representative of the sport.
100%.
And of course, being one that implements these particular protocols. Yes, I'm going to basically bring it in line as traffic ordinance. Okay, we all know that we are supposed to stop before we get to a white line of a stop street.
Yeah.
Yet all of us creep over that particular line. And when we get fined, the argument was, but I did stop. Okay. So there's one law for everybody. And whether I agree with government sentiment or health department sentiment or not, the realities is that unfortunately, if we are lenient on one side of the structure, then we have to be lenient on everything else.
Agreed.
So the realities is that, does it make sense that you've got 22 people in a team, including coaches, management, etc., that finish the game and can't go and shower together? It not logical. The fact that one is substituted on and substituted off on the bench within a matter of 2 to 5 minutes between each substitution, and having to wear the mask on the bench and then go onto the court and play full contact don't make sense. Okay. However, it is protocols that have been put in by the World Health Organization. The medical commissions are following it. It is law, and if one doesn't wear the mask, etc., then there are fines and imprisonment and whatever the case may come through. So yes and no. A lot of the implementation of regulation can be questioned, but at the same time, it's those people that are models for other people. They are role models for other people. And the fact is that they are abiding by the law, which then also has a psychological effect on the followers as well, that they must also abide by the law. The one thing that Rwanda did, which was extraordinary and something that we hadn't seen in any of the sport, is that they sold online tickets for people to attend the games. But it was very strictly controlled. Everything was done 24 hours before you could buy a ticket. You had to produce a negative COVID test. And then when arriving at the stadium, everything was on telephone. So it wasn't a piece of paper that could be forged or changed or whatever the case may be. You rocked up. If you didn't have a smartphone and you didn't produce that little barcode that said that you were a negative candidate, you weren't allowed in the stadium, irrespective of whether you bought the ticket or not. So exactly the same protocol to buying an airline ticket was the same in selling a game ticket. And then, of course, they brought in the same restrictions as what we're having with funerals and weddings and so on, is that only a percentage of people can be in attendance to watch those games. This was something new, and I hope that the rest of the sport take cognizance of this and introduce it at the same time. I watch a rugby stadium that is completely empty, and I'm turning around and saying that if they applied the same sort of protocol, split those people around a 55,000 seater stadium, what is the chance of the spread of the disease? Yeah. Okay, again, haven't been proven, so one can't say what is right and what is wrong at this given time period. Does wearing a mask sitting on the bench prevent COVID? Again, I am of a question. Why must everybody come into a bubble and be tested 100%, stay within that bubble, not leave that entity to go and get shopping or anything else done, come in the same bus, arrive at the venue, leave at the same time, etc., go back to the hotel. And then the controversy is that on the bench, you need to wear a mask. It doesn't make sense, but at the same time, we are all role models to the sport, and we need to let others know out there, those that are amateur, those that are playing local league, etc., that, you know what, the reality is that in local league structures, you more likely will contract the COVID than what you would do as a professional entity. In so saying that, you've got to question, why did so many Shark players and so many Lion players contract the disease?
I'll get it, yeah.
Okay, so it's an unknown science at the moment, and I think that 2020 taught us a lesson. 2021, we just got to employ this lesson, and hopefully it will make a change. If it doesn't, then we don't see sport. That's the realities.
Well, very tough question, very well answered. Thank you very much for that. Final question for you. Looking ahead, 2021, you've got couple of provincial competitions, tournaments taking place March and April. May sees the potential hosting of the Thailand International Wheelchair Basketball Tournament, but
Yes.
that could move out until November if it can't be held according to relevant protocols, and depending what happens globally in the Asian sort of subcontinent round about May. That may take place,
Correct.
I understand. And then national champs in July, Commonwealth qualifiers in September, and World Champ qualifiers in November. Potentially a stacked year for wheelchair basketball, and probably a very, very busy year administratively for you and the team, not only here in South Africa, but across Africa. A lot of those challenges, those lessons learned out of Rwanda and other tournaments, hopefully going to be taken into all of this that's on the calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the one thing that drawing up competition for me in 2020 and now 2021 is the fact that I've used all types of forecasting to be able to come up with something that should work. It's extremely difficult, and I don't talk about myself, I talk about everybody else that's in this game that's doing exactly the same thing, is that looking at trends, we're designing a competition calendar in accordance to trend. If I take 2020 alone, the calendar changed 4 times before we could have competition.
Yeah.
Purely because we were in the unknown, we were treading deep water. Right now, seeing what took place last year, seeing the relevant waves and how the waves affected in different climatic conditions, the fact that we in the Southern Hemisphere and competition is taking place right now in the Northern Hemisphere, or should I say is right now shut down in the Northern Hemisphere, and we're going through the second wave, which is unprecedented. It was very difficult to be able to say, right, with domestic competition, let's go back and prepare our national teams for these competitions, because right now we've had 9 months of non-preparation. And that's a major concern. You're looking at teams that are going through to the Paralympics and the Olympics, and many of them have been in a bubble for 3-4 months without seeing their families, preparing for Japan, and maybe Japan will not take place right now under the current condition. The sad thing that I read this morning is that the variants has not only now been picked up in the UK, but in most of Europe right now. It's their winter month. This South African variant that has come through is now picked up in their Australasia side, which means that it has been picked up in Australia. It will be taken back to Thailand, Singapore, etc., because it's going to take place. We're finding out that this variant that we're dealing with right now is far more destructive than the first wave. So the question being is they're already predicting the third wave come the South Africans' winter. And if this thing can mutate the way it's done in a matter of 2-3 months, what are we going to expect for the winter month? So that's the reality that I'm faced with competition drawing throughout the whole of Africa. I need to take into consideration as well is that Southern Africa is suffering from this right now. What is happening when all borders open?
Yeah,
there's a major concern. And I see that there's now over 18 airlines that have no longer flying into South Africa and no longer flying out of South Africa. The realities is that will we be able to do the Thailand tour under the current circumstances right now? And I don't think it's going to be a possibility. Will Tokyo take place? Under all means, it must take place, because if it doesn't take place, that country's economic structure is going to collapse.
Yeah, the investment,
the investment side of it is massive. I'm looking at world qualifications now for FIBA. We've held the first window. The second window is supposed to start in February and in March, and then the third window in July. The realities that we're faced with is that unless these protocols are properly in place, this is not going to take place. And we've got a problem with Africa. Africa is not recording COVID cases. And there's another problem. They're not doing the testing that's required. So the realities that we face right now is that really and truly everything is a guesstimate. I listening to our medical commission, listening to world commissions, etc., it looks as though the second wave will die down from July, August, which means that September to January will be the window that will open up for competition again. But in saying that, do we then spend the money that we have on unprepared teams to go and qualify, knowing that our members are not of a particular standard? Disability is a different story to us able-bodied. As able-bodied guys get out in the street and go for a run, our wheelies cannot just get out on the street and go for a run. Especially many of our black community that have gone back to the homelands where they don't have decent roads and decent infrastructure where they can get in their chair and push their chair and train. And when we talk about rural homes, they don't have the facility of going into gyms and training because all of that's shut down. So how are they keeping themselves physically fit, first of all?
Yeah.
How are they keeping themselves a skill ability without being able to get onto a basketball court because the restrictions are in place? And then lastly, how are we testing biometrics and anthrometrics and such forth? We just can't do that at the moment. It's, for my coaches, it's a freaking nightmare, to put it politely. They are dealing with the guys on webinars and giving them game plans and teaching them and whatever the case may be. But when you've got a guy that's picked up 15 kgs, 10 to 15 kgs, you've got to get him on the court. He's got to lose that 10, 15 kgs, build muscle matter again, because he hasn't pushed a wheelchair for the last 6 months. Okay, these are concerns that we are faced with right now. Sponsors, of course, are all return of investment. They don't put money in unless there's a major return. So again, we've had to change the whole protocol on how we're marketing our sponsors out there. We can't show basketball because there's the limitation that's there. The live streaming is restricted as well because of the number of camera crew that's allowed and all the protocols that go through with that. So again, we've had to look at different methodologies on getting the game out there. The only way that we've done is doing throwback Thursdays and game analysis Wednesdays and so on and so on. And the idea behind it is to start showing all old basketball games as what FIBA has basically been doing over the last 6 months now, just to keep people interested again in what we're doing. You can no longer run leagues over a period of time. Rugby is experiencing the same problem. The National Basketball League is experiencing the same problem. So everything goes back to competition format. So things have got to be run over 6-7 days. Again, under the crisis with employment at the moment, people don't want to take off leave because they're going to lose their jobs.
Yep.
So it all impacts on one another. And yeah, it's an achievable calendar that I put out there. Going on medical conditions, I believe that we will be able to meet those demands that are coming through. The biggest concern right now is what government agencies are going to say.
Yeah,
that's where everything now is full stop. So if the president on the 11th of February turns around and says lockdown restrictions are lifted to a certain extent, but he still imposes the 50-member gathering structure and it has to be outdoors, then all indoor activity stops because we can't go that particular line. So the realities are, can we find adequate outdoor facilities to run the game? And then the cost factor comes in, because pushing and breaking on a tennis court surface or a concrete surface, tires are worn out within a matter of 3 games in comparison to an indoor where tires last 12 games. And then again, the cost implication that comes through with that. The fact that the chair rolls on a hard surface, tennis court surface, on a wooden surface is the longevity of that particular chair. The equipment packs up very quickly, and so on and so on. So it all impacts upon itself. Calendar-wise, are we going to achieve it? We will do whatever we can possibly do to deliver to sponsors, first of all, and to ensure that our international calendar exists. It has to, otherwise the sport is dead. That's the reality.
Definitely a challenging year ahead. Lots of lessons learned last year. Hopefully it will make this year slightly easier. I wish you all success for the year ahead, and we'll definitely catch up later in the year to see how it's unfolded and if there have been any challenges added and changed the calendar 4, 5, 6 times.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much, Mark. Much appreciated always.
All the best, and we look forward to catching up later in the year.
Magic. Take care.
Bye-bye.